Hi, this is your Supin Bhartiya and welcome to TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us once again Rob Hirschfeld, CEO and co-founder of RackN. Rob, it's great to have you back on the show.
Swap, it's a pleasure, and I'm super excited about this year's KubeCon. So let's get to it.
It is exciting and it's almost here. So first of all, let's just talk a bit about your involvement with this ecosystem and how you have seen things progress from the lens of KubeCon, CloudNativeCon, where like the way that the project has evolved, the ecosystem has evolved, the event has also evolved.
It certainly has. It's really stunning to watch how much things have progressed. I was involved on the very first days when the project itself was announced at OSCON, and was seeing some of the very early demos. That goes back well over 10 years now at the first KubeCons in hotels, where it was really a event run by Joseph Jacks as a user. So it has changed dramatically since the days the CNCF was formed, a Linux Foundation took over. It has really become the preeminent event for development and developer experience process. And I think this is one of the things that's really changed in the show. And for the CNCF also, right? We used to joke about how big and broad the CNCF landscape was, and that's still a reasonable joke. But at the same time, it really has come to reflect just how broadly the cloud, ecosystem has become a development ecosystem, right? Development process. That some of the meanings of the very words we talk about, things like DevOps, have transformed over the life of what we've seen Kubernetes and KubeCon grow into. And hats off to the Linux Foundation, CF Foundation, for really understanding that this was going to become a cloud development platform conference, much more than it was about, container management solutions.
How have you seen, because every year there is a specific theme as well, how you have seen the maturity? There was a time where, once again, we are talking about security, because security was a big problem, scaling is a big challenge. Now we hear a lot about, for the last two conferences, Gen AI is a big thing. So for this year's, how do you see the themes evolving, and what are you excited about this year's North American conference?
Wow. I mean, AI is clearly a major theme, and it will be a theme in how things go. But when I look at what the actual topics are, what things we're talking about, it's not that dominated by AI. We're actually seeing a lot of things around platform engineering, which Backstage came in a couple of years ago, but now it feels like it's really being embedded into the discussion a lot more. The Open Tofu, the Terraform fork, we're seeing a lot of pieces around that. So platform engineering, cloud provisioning, we're seeing there's a lot of WASM components, the WebAssembly frameworks, which is really on the developer side. So what I see when I look at the talks is that we're really talking much more about advanced use cases for Kubernetes, right? How Kubernetes is being used by development teams in a process-focused way, right? GitOps and the GitOps processes have really been part of the conversation. I saw a lot of cross-plane capabilities. That's what's interesting. We're not seeing a lot of how do I install Kubernetes? How do I do base operations for Kubernetes? Right? Those components of the system, the operation side, I really don't see the same intensity, the same interest in that we've seen in past conferences. And I think that's a natural evolution of this conference becoming a developer-focused conference rather than a user, an operator-focused conference.
You mentioned developers and, of course, platform. You mentioned in like last couple of years, since the whole cloud native came, that we kind of push developers on the back burners. We start talking about new personas, DevOps, and all those things. But now a lot of focus is shifting back on app developers, because app developers are the one who actually write all these business applications. How have you seen the focus on personas have changed over years?
I think that what we've seen is that developer focus, right? That is a very marketable place. One thing that's worth noting is the number of vendors at this event is astronomical. right? When you you look at any one class of vendors, and you're gonna see dozens of vendors in every class across the conference, which makes it a very noisy event and a place that while it's where everybody's coming, it's also a place that's hard to get attention if you're one of these vendors and in the mix of all these pieces. And the number of talks that get submitted, the number of talks that are run in parallel are astronomical, right? The scope of what this event is very hard to get your head around. But looking at the survey from that perspective, it is much more about developer tooling. I think that those audiences are easier to reach. They're more likely to travel to a conference. And a lot of the operational components for what CNCF has become, that is actually much more being handled by distros or the service providers.
We have been talking about this adoption of Kubernetes, and it's in production now. Early days, we used to talk about is production ready or not. How have you seen the enterprise adoption of Kubernetes and other CNCF projects? How does that reflect on this event, the folks you meet, the discussions you have, the questions you get asked?
Oh my goodness, that's a really significant point. And we haven't said the words VMware or Broadcom yet. And so we need to talk about that as part of this answer. Enterprise adoption for Kubernetes is near universal. It is becoming, I would easily argue it has become the de facto development target platform for enterprises. And that includes not just normal enterprises in cloud. We also see it more and more in the edge. So we see a universal adoption across our customer base and across the people we interact with in industry of Kubernetes as an accepted component. We're still seeing that as a development platform, not as much as a software delivery platform. And I'm hoping, for 10 years, I've been hoping this would happen. I'm still hoping to see us do more software delivery as an ISV in Kubernetes as a platform. But it is universally adopted. In the last year, with Broadcom changing their license terms and pricing, we have seen a tremendous interest in Kubernetes as the default platform to escape VMware. And so what we see a lot of enterprises looking at is, can they bypass the virtualization layer, go straight to the container layer? They're already planning to use containers, but can they do Kubernetes on bare metal? Something as RackN, as a bare metal automation company, is seeing a tremendous amount of interest in across our customers and our prospects, looking for ways to focus on Kubernetes as an exit from VMware. And not just VMware, but they're actually questioning virtualization architectures as a whole and asking if they need it. The way we had assumed before. So in enterprise, it's not just widely adopted, it's actually the foundation of a questioning of some core IT architecture decisions that we've been sort of assuming for the last decade. It's potentially very disruptive.
And since you brought Broadcom VMware, we had the discussion, we recorded a couple of shows also in the topic, the alternatives that are there for customers. While Kubernetes as a community may not focus that much on these market dynamics changes, because the focus is more on other areas. That's where vendors come into picture. That's where distributions come into picture. But have you seen any impact on Kubernetes, the development process, the whole approach, because of what happened with Broadcom and VMware?
I don't think we've seen a real change in how people are planning to use Kubernetes. I think that was already happening. So I think that we have already expected that development efforts were not targeting servers or OSs directly, but focusing on container delivery and Kubernetes delivery. I think what it's really done is the broad adoption of Kubernetes didn't need to slow down or adopt. It really created a place where the enterprises who were doing it started saying, I don't have to change my plans. And this is really important for enterprises. They can keep going with the plans they have and just change the deployment process or the underlying architecture. And it's worth noting, you go back 10 years, this is what Kubernetes plan, right? This was the goal for Kubernetes, to be a neutral platform so that you didn't have to care about what infrastructure you're deploying to. That included being able to eliminate virtualization and go directly to bare metal. It's been a long journey because deploying Kubernetes on bare metal, it wasn't designed for that in a lot of ways. And bare metal requires you to have expertise, controls, automation, and process that is, it's cloud scale process, right? You really need bare metal cloud, the type of thing that RackN does. What we've seen is the amount of controls you need to execute bare metal Kubernetes requires you to have much higher degree of automation than just slapping it on containers like you would, or on servers. And so, without virtualization layer, it's going to take a little bit of time. But the layer above Kubernetes, they don't care. It makes no actual difference. And in some cases, like with AI and GPU controls, or when you need direct access to storage, the bare metal clusters actually offer a better resource management, resource sharing, and resource control than a virtualized cluster would.
I mean, since we are talking about Broadcom VMware license change, it is not as bad as a lot of other things have happened, like HashiCorp happened last year. This year, Redis and then Velky came. Both OpenTofu and Velky are doing great. New release was out. I talked to Midland Olson as also the whole process of the development. How do you see the impact of these kind of changes on the whole cloud native open source and Kubernetes communities?
I think you're right in that open source communities are still continuing to churn around license. And that is an important factor for people who are really focused on open source and open source tech. From an enterprise perspective, a lot of the enterprise players really don't want to get that deep in license wars or license battles. They are looking for a vendor who is going to surface an integrated solution. And I think this is the thing that you can't decouple from the open source discussion. Open source typically runs to a lot of small projects that require integration, lifecycle control, sustaining. That is not something that most enterprise teams want to take on, even though they like the benefits they get of having a community or an open foundation behind the work they're doing. At the end of the day, they actually want a more integrated solution. They want something that's opinionated. They want a vendor that's going to help make sure all those pieces work together smoothly. It's one of the reasons we see a lot of OpenShift in the markets that we go into rather than Kubernetes specifically. And that distinction is important. I think when it's easy as an open source community to get very wrapped up in open source and open source licensing. It really isn't something that the enterprise consumers get particularly worked up about as a buying class. And so I think it can be a mistake to be overly indexed on which projects are open or which ones aren't. And in some cases, a too open of a solution can be a turnoff for an enterprise buyer. They actually want a vendor to help them out. They don't always want to pay for it, which is a challenge, but they do want a vendor who's going to support, sustain, educate, help incorporate these pieces into it.
And you also mentioned, the ISV community. What kind of ISV community is there around Kubernetes and the whole cloud native CNCF landscape and ecosystem?
One of the things that we see a lot is because Kubernetes has in the last decade has been really dominated by cloud deployment and cloud models. A lot of the ISVs, independent software vendors that are in the ecosystem around Kubernetes, are not what I would consider a classic software vendor, meaning they don't sell you software and then you sell you a license for that software. They're actually software providers or SaaS providers, where it's a service that they operate for you and you connect to, use the cloud locality to connect to. So a lot of what we see and a lot of the monetization strategy for all these open source projects that get included in the Kubernetes Foundation, those actually, instead of being delivered as software, they're being delivered as a software as a service or a SaaS in the cloud and cloud adjacent. What I would like to see, and I've been looking for, is actually having people be able to buy licensed software and run it themselves in their own Kubernetes cluster. That is, I haven't seen that market emerge as much, in part because it takes more effort to deliver software that way. Variations that come in when people are operating software themselves, those variations make it more expensive to run and maintain software. That's something RackN knows very well because we deliver software, not a SaaS. And so those variations are part of the work that has required, software companies to do extra lift as opposed to a SaaS company that can just run the service for people. But as Kubernetes dominance, as we've already talked about, gets into industry, and as certain vendors become more dominant in that industry, it becomes easier for a software vendor, an ISV, to actually come into an existing cluster and then expand and operate within an environment in a repeatable way. And that's transformative, right? And we see that already. The difference between OpenShift and Kubernetes is OpenShift actually includes a significant number of packaged products that are integrated together as a system. Being able to create that as an ecosystem and then start delivering products into that is really transformative for both the software vendors, but even more for the software consumers, because it lets them have better control, keep data within their control planes. It means that they don't have to cross a whole bunch of data boundaries. It means they have a lot more predictability. In some ways, this is what Kubernetes has promised, this type of portable ecosystem that we're starting to see come into the industry. That's one of the things I'll be watching for at the show to see to the extent to which ISVs are able to surface. So far in my research for the show and historically, most software is still being delivered as a SaaS. But that change, I think, has tremendous benefits for the industry. And I'm a big advocate for a return to ISVs.
And earlier you also mentioned, of course, when you're talking personas, you mentioned platform engineering. What are you looking for at this show from platform engineering from RackN's perspective? So
from RackN's perspective, we see platform engineering as a really nice story about self-service. What we've observed, because we were very excited about platform engineering several years ago as things started to emerge, platform engineering for CNCF has really moved into developer self-service portals, much more than infrastructure platform engineering, which from RackN's perspective is advanced data center operations teams that create more unified platforms for infrastructure management, which is actually a very different concept than platform engineering. So what we've been seeing is a evolving split between a platform engineering focused on developer self-service and portals, very backstage CNCF Kubernetes focused. And we've done some nice training sessions where we actually show integrating something like Backstage into infrastructure self-service. But there's another enterprise trend that had for a while been floating under platform engineering, I think is starting to drift away, which is this idea of having more structured, more coherent infrastructure automation plans and APIs and services across an enterprise data center. Very cloud-like approach to self-managed infrastructure. What I've been reading is those trends are starting to split. Even analyst firms like Gartner are separating platform engineering from infrastructure platform engineering. Still sort of confusing. So we're watching that. We do see that as a very significant component in what will be covered. There's a lot of talking about Backstage and platform engineering and developer portals, but that has really become more clustered around CI/CD process, DevOps, GitOps, even things like policy and the Open Policy Agent, which will be a big topic at KubeCon this year. Those pieces are all sort of getting clustered around developer tooling and developer productivity, like we've talked about. And the topics around infrastructure engineering and architecture are really much less present at this show. As big as it's gotten, there are things that fall out of the scope of the community.
Talk a bit about what kind of presence you and RackN will have at this event.
We are very excited. I'm going to be at the pre-event and at the show. We have two other engineers, including our CTO, who are going to be there. And we have been putting a lot of effort into Kubernetes on bare metal. That includes cluster API integrations that we've just wrapped up that make Digital Rebar interface to the cluster API. And we've been doing a tremendous amount of work on OpenShift, both on bootstrapping OpenShift and then on running OpenShift's cluster manager as a cluster, automated cluster spin-up. So, the ability to do OpenShift and Kubernetes on bare metal is really important to us, to our customers. And we will have people on site who are excited to talk about what we're doing, how we're doing, what the challenges that we're hitting, and compare notes with other people who are interested in that type of operational control for Kubernetes.
What role do you see events like Cloud Native Con, Kubernetes play, for the whole ecosystem?
Shows like this are absolutely critical for the ecosystem because they actually let us talk, compare notes, and work together. And I hate to say it, but sometimes just the vibe that you get when you're talking to somebody about what they're trying to accomplish, what problems they're hitting, where they've been successful, those note comparing, even small hallway conversations about it, that drives so much innovation and emphasis on what comes next. So it really is remarkable that, very quick conversations, a level of enthusiasm or a level of frustration can really drive a whole year worth of innovation cycle. And that is something that you don't get well remote, and you pick up very quickly in person. So, we'll be seeing that for this year, and events like this are absolutely essential for helping the whole industry understand where they're going to put their emphasis for the coming years.
What are your expectations from this event? What kind of discussions you're looking forward to? What kind of folks you're looking forward to talk to? And just in general, that you're going to the event, what are you excited about?
I'm excited to check in and see sort of how much the community has come together. I always want to watch for who's coming to the event, right? What type of leadership roles they're playing, what they're trying to get out of it. For us, we're really looking for the people who are bringing Kubernetes back on premises, who want to repatriate those workloads and, start driving Kubernetes into the heart of their infrastructure, displacing virtualization, looking at new architectures, really driving AI and AI purchases much faster. It really is about this acceleration loop that we're expecting to see as Kubernetes adoption, becomes the core platform for innovation in enterprises. And, RackN is very much helping customers drive that forward as fast as we and they possibly can.
Rob, once again, thank you so much for joining me today, and of course talk about the upcoming KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. I'm excited to see you there, and once again, thank you.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.